Without further ado, let's get started. Let me make sure I got my share options. Uh, okay. Um, so I decided to put this lecture together because um, what happens frequently when people change to a plant-based diet is they go to see their regular physician, and the doctor notes that there are changes in cholesterol levels, levels of iron, storage iron, and other um, uh, nutrients in their on their lab tests, and the doctors can become alarmed. And one frequent uh, nutrient is the levels of storage iron in the body begin to drop precipitously, and the doctors become alarmed and tell them, "Oh, you are in danger of becoming anemic." And now, no, the person is not anemic, but the doctors seem to think that they are in danger of becoming anemic. And what they don't understand is that the body is deliberately dumping all of this excess iron that it has been forced to absorb. And we'll talk about what makes the human body absorb excess iron when you are eating an animal-based diet, but that when you stop eating dead tissue, your body no longer is forced to absorb heme iron, and therefore it's able to get rid of iron, because excess iron causes you to be at increased risk for cancer, infections, and other metabolic problems. Um, when you're not eating animals, you also have much lower cholesterol levels. And I recently had a patient who because he had changed to a more plant-based uh, diet, his cholesterol level dropped to about 124, and he was told that that was abnormal, and that he should be concerned. And in fact, that is quite normal for someone on a plant-based diet, and is very healthy, and is really where human beings should be. But his doctor's not used to seeing levels that low, seem to think that it is, again, something to be worried about, when in fact it is an excellent number, and puts a person at much lower risk for, again, heart disease, dementia, and even some cancers. So we, that's why I wanted to look at what is truly normal and what is really good for us as human beings. In fact, some of these things, in my opinion, haven't really been well defined, because so many of our allegedly normal values have really been taken from what are effectively our sick populations, people who are continuing to eat animal foods, and are therefore having blood levels that are skewed by ingesting um, um, I shudder to use the word foods, just ingesting things that are altering their physiology in unhealthy ways. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Um, and this is another in my series of chemistry for understanding nutrition. The other lectures in this series are on protein, carbohydrates, fats, and antioxidants, and vitamins and minerals. So this is chemistry for understanding nutrition. This installment is nutrients and normal values. And today we are going to look at what is normal, what is truly needed, and what is good. And as always, we are going to try and follow the admonition given to us in the book of Proverbs. With all of our getting, we're going to try and seek to get understanding. So in trying to decide which topics and nutrients to discuss in this lecture, I first thought about what I would discuss, and it quickly became clear to me that the numbers of things that there were to discuss would require a full day to cover. So then I thought about, well, okay, what topics could I discuss in, approximately hours lecture? And again, very broad topics. If I'm going to discuss them with any degree of completeness, so that left me with, well, what should I discuss? And I decided that to correctly understand human nutrition, we have to have an understanding of the basics of human nutrition. Um, let me get this out of my way here. The basics of nutrition science. And that's why I originally created this lecture series, Chemistry for Understanding Nutrition. And in deciding how to craft this particular lecture, I realized it would be confusing and potentially misleading to try and discuss normal physiologic values for humans without providing the proper context and dietary theory. It's impossible to get a correct destination if you start down and remain on the wrong road. And I think we all appreciate that. So we have to begin with realizing that as human beings, we are designed as that we are strict herbivores. We are not omnivores. We're not meat eaters. We are herbivores. We cannot understand how human physiology is supposed to work until we know what we are designed to eat. It is only within this context that proper nutrition and the keys to human health can be defined, understood, and fully known. Now, I know that there are some people are going to say, well, everybody's different. The differences between any individual human beings are so small that they really are negligible. And until someone can go to the bottom of a 12-foot pool, practice deep breathing, and then come up and tell me about their experience, I don't want to hear about differences between human beings because we're all basically alike, okay? Here are a few of the herbivorous physiologic and anatomic adaptations in humans that show by biological design, we are committed herbivores. Vitamin C metabolism in human beings. Most mammals, except for a very few, make their own vitamin C because it is so essential for life. Vitamin C, well, it's a vitamin in us because we have to take it in through our diet, but it is an essential cofactor in the manufacture, which is literally the substance that holds our bodies together. It is the matrix in which the minerals are deposited that create our bones. It holds, it forms the substance of our ligaments that attach our bones to one another, the tendons that attach our muscles to our bones, the tissue that forms the valves in our hearts that anchor our teeth in place. And in other words, it is the substance of our most of the tissues in our bodies. And again, without it, we would literally just start to melt and fall apart. So it is so essential. You literally cannot live without it. And the only way in which a creature can exist that cannot make vitamin C is if you are continually taking it in your diet every single day, because it is water soluble, meaning your body doesn't store it, it flushes out of your system, and you have to continually replace it. So obviously we were ingesting a diet as a species that continually resupplied this nutrient on a daily basis, and that is not an animal food-based diet. Secondly, vitamin A metabolism. Again, an essential nutrient, and we can actually make vitamin A from pigments found in plant foods, beta carotenes and other carotenoids. Further, we cannot detoxify preformed vitamin A. Other animals will store vitamin A in their livers, and but preformed vitamin A in excess amounts is toxic to human beings. It's poisonous. If human beings eat, say, the liver of a bear, they can kill themselves because it's so high in preformed vitamin A, and we cannot detoxify that preformed vitamin A. By contrast, meat-eating animals cannot take plant pigments and convert it into vitamin A, but we can. So in fact, what we can do is we can take those plant pigments, store them in our tissues in very high levels, which is one reason if you eat tons and tons of carrots or other brightly colored plant foods, you can turn orange, or it'll color your tissues. And then take those pigments and convert them into vitamin A as needed, so that we have a continual store of that provitamin. And then when you look at potassium versus sodium homeostasis in humans, our bodies hold on to sodium very, very tightly, because sodium is found in very low amounts in plant foods. But if you've ever cut your finger and stuck it in your mouth, you know that sodium is plentiful in blood, and it's a cation that's found in high amounts in animal tissues. By contrast, potassium is widely distributed in plant foods, and our kidneys every day dump tons and tons of potassium so that they can keep our potassium levels within a normal range. So we tightly regulate potassium by getting rid of the excess potassium that we're constantly taking in through plant foods, but we hold on to sodium because it is a rare metabolite in plant foods, and that's why all herbivores have a desire to seek out salt. That's why we love the taste of salt, and animals such as deer, antelope, cows, etc., all seek salt licks in the wild to replenish their body's sodium. By contrast, carnivores have no innate mechanism to tell them to seek salt even when they are markedly sodium depleted, because the nature assumes that if they're alive, they're full of salt. So they don't need to actually go out and seek sodium. And then human jaw structure and mechanics are those of a classical herbivore, which I won't go into detail here because you can find that in my lecture, Are Humans Designed to Eat Meat? So then what should human beings eat? Again, we can look at human diet and anatomy and see that we are adapted for a strictly plant-based diet. Again, I'm not going to go into detail on that here, because I have a very detailed comparative anatomy lecture that goes into this in great detail. But again, from this schematic, you can see very clearly that we don't have the anatomy of the carnivore. We have anatomy that is more in line with that of the herbivore. And so I would tell you to please see my lecture, Are Humans Designed to Eat Meat? It'll give you all of the detail that you need. Now, in nature, organisms have to be energy efficient. Troglobites are animals that have completely adapted to cave life. And in a very short period of time, these creatures, they lose their eyes and become blind. They also lose pigmentation and have no coloration because there's no light in these caves, so there's no reason for them to have melanin or eyes. And in a competitive environment, organisms can't afford to expend energy on unneeded biological processes and machinery, because nature's dictum is use it or lose it. Therefore, as humans, we would not retain the biological machinery to process plant foods if we didn't need it. That's one reason we lost the ability to make vitamin C. We're taking it in our diet. We don't need it. Therefore, we don't need to waste energy making it. And we can see from human history that biological adaptation is relatively swift, because in Northern European countries, where they began to practice the process of using cow's milk and other mammalian milks for energy, they quickly adapted to be able to continue to digest the enzyme, the milk sugar, lactose. Most human beings, and in fact, most mammals, stop making the enzyme that digests lactose after they're weaned. However, in those countries where they invented the practice of dairying to provide calories that help them survive winter months when plant foods weren't available, they quickly adapted to retain the ability to digest lactose. And that process only took about 3,000 to 5,000 years. So in a very short period of time, the majority of Northern Europeans retain the ability to digest lactose, whereas the rest of humanity continues to remain lactose intolerant. So again, if humans, the majority of humans had become dependent on meat and animal tissues, there would have been some signs of adaptation over time. And although there is the adaptation to digest lactose, there still isn't any adaptation to make the ingestion of cow's milk any less dangerous in terms of its fat content, its protein profile, and so forth. And so while it may have helped these populations get through winter months and survive long enough to reproduce, it did nothing to reduce the risk of long-term damage to their health profile and the metabolic consequences of consuming another species milk that come when people consume dairy. So vitamin C metabolism shows our body stop wasting energy, making the essential enzyme cofactor because it was supplied in our diet. Omega-3 metabolism shows that we retain the enzyme to actually elongate plant-sourced 18-carbon omega-3s into EPA and DHA, unlike carnivores, which have to ingest the preformed variety. And although some of us became lactase persisters for extra energy, we have not adapted to ingesting animal fat and protein without becoming ill. So the fact is, because of our animal food-centered diets, we are getting sicker and we're dying sooner. As countries around the globe industrialize and westernize their diets with more animal and processed foods, it correlates with increases in allergies, autoimmune and chronic diseases, and increased prevalence of psychiatric disorders like depression, anxiety, and violent behavior. And that's actually one of the things that I found most intriguing and profound, is that when we look at nations like China and other places that had traditionally consumed a more plant-centered diet, that are rapidly industrializing, that not only are we seeing the expected increases in heart disease, cancers, diabetes, and so forth, but we're also seeing a concomitant rise in depression, anxiety, violent behavior, that there is this corresponding increase in psychiatric disturbances that follows the rise in chronic disease. So it's not just the impact on our metabolic parameters, but it also affects our psychiatric profile. Asthma also increased tenfold in Western countries from 1960 to 2000, which again followed a rise in the ingestion of processed foods, dairy foods, and fast foods since the 1950s. Type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and Crohn's disease have increased over 300% in Western countries. Again, following a rise in per capita increase in dairy products and fast foods. The prevalence of type 1 and type 2 diabetes will increase by a projected 54% to over 54.9 million Americans between 2015 and 2030, and annual diabetes deaths will also increase by more than 38%. Breast cancer rates have increased 8% in women less than 40 years old over the past 10 years. Colon cancer rates increased by 9% in people less than 55 years old between 1995 and 2015. Colorectal cancer rates continue to increase 2% per year since the 1990s. And again, when you look at data showing consumption of fast foods and processed foods, these things have continually increased. They are being eaten at younger and younger ages because instead of children eating a breakfast at home and grain-based breakfast cereals, they're now getting their breakfast at fast foods restaurants, and they're being based on these, breakfast sausage, high-fat sandwiches, and so their digestive tracts are being exposed at earlier and earlier ages to high-fat, high-meat, high-dairy products. So what we're seeing is that all of the major causes of death, disease and death in Western countries result from our animal food-centered diet. They are literally plagues of our own making. Heart disease, cancers, diabetes, asthma, obesity, strokes, autoimmune diseases, and dementias are largely preventable on a plant-based diet. So let's look at the U.S. RDAs. RDA stands for recommended daily allowances. Where did we and how did we end up with these values? Well, the RDAs are based on what are called the EAR, or estimated average requirement for Americans. So again, the recommended daily allowance is based on the estimated average requirement. And what is the estimated average requirement? Well, that is what is considered the mean requirement or median requirement for 50% of the population. So the government estimates the amount of a particular nutrient that will meet the needs of 50% of the American population. And then it moves the needle, if you will, 2 standard deviations to the right of that, so that you will end up with a recommended amount that it estimates will meet the needs of 97.5% of the population. So in other words, the RDAs are a deliberate overestimation of the needs of any given individual in an effort to make sure that they are covering the needs of 97.5% of the US population. So again, I guess I just covered all that. So let's talk about protein, because there is so much gaslighting and misinformation in the public and in the media, and get put out by nutrition companies about protein, that we really need to understand what protein is, what it is used for, why it is important, and why it is well, and what constitutes protein quality, and also why you should not be eating lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of protein. So first of all, what makes protein protein? What makes protein protein is the presence of nitrogen. Okay, so carbohydrates are made up of just what the name says: carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. Dietary fats are also made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just in a more concentrated form. They're primarily carbon and hydrogen with much less oxygen, and so they're a more concentrated energy form. But neither carbohydrates nor fats contain any nitrogen. Only, protein contain nitrogen, and the nitrogen in protein is attached to a carbon backbone and is made into what are called amino acids. So the nitrogen that is eventually incorporated into amino acids is taken up by plants, actually through their roots, not through their leaves. The carbon that is utilized by plants to make carbohydrates comes in through the leaves. The nitrogen comes in through the roots. Symbiotic bacteria in the soil working with the plants break the bond, because the nitrogen in the atmosphere is actually 2 nitrogen atoms that are triple bonded to each other, and it's very, very inert, which is why it doesn't really react with anything normally. But these bacteria and the plants can break that triple bond and then reduce the nitrogen atoms. What does that mean? It means they add electrons to those nitrogen atoms that make those nitrogen atoms very reactive, because electrons want to grab onto something. They don't like just sort of hanging out by themselves. They're like those creepy guys at the discotheque that always want to grab onto something. Then these activated nitrogen atoms can join onto these carbon backbones. And once they do that, they can form what are called amino acids. These newly synthesized amino acids are then attached to one another to form proteins. So proteins are strings of amino acids that have been joined together. So again, to briefly review, nitrogen gas, one of the most inert substances known. Normally, nitrogen atoms are triple bonded to one another. Plants working in concert with bacteria can break those bonds and fix the atmospheric nitrogen. In other words, attach electrons to it to make those nitrogen atoms reactive and convert it into a form that can then be attached to the carbon backbone. So you see the the green, you have the amino group containing the nitrogen atom, which now is bonded to two hydrogen atoms and then attached to the carbon atom. And then you have what's called the R group, which is a side chain, which don't get hung up on that. That just is a chain of different chemical groups that gives the different amino acids their various properties and allow them to do all the amazing things that amino acids can do. And the important thing that I want you guys to get from this point is that all amino acids, and therefore all proteins, is initially made by plants. Okay? I mean, if there's a mantra you need to repeat every day, every night, when you go to bed at night, when you wake up in the morning, all amino acids and all protein is initially made by plants. No animal on this earth can make protein de novo. And if all of the plants died on this planet, all life would eventually be extinguished because animals cannot make new protein by themselves. So that means all animal protein is actually nothing but recycled plant protein. Okay, all animal protein is recycled plant protein. Now, the next super important point. For years, people thought plant proteins were, quote, incomplete, that they didn't have all of the necessary amino acids that we need for life. And that is not true. All plant proteins are complete proteins. You do not need to have a chemistry set to combine one type of plant protein with another type of plant protein to make sure that you're getting enough of this or enough of that. All plant proteins are complete proteins, okay? So just get that through your skull. All plant proteins are complete proteins. And as long as you are taking in enough calories for your body weight and activity level, you and depending on and eating nothing but plant proteins, you will get enough proteins to survive. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button. Forgive me for that. We'll have to race through this, get back where we were. That little thing scrolling at the bottom just says, same thing about essential amino acids, that all essential amino acids are initially made by plants as well. All right. Amino acids and proteins are like the alphabet in the Library of Congress. Well, what does that mean? So there are only 20 amino acids that make up all of the proteins in all plants and all animals. It's just like the alphabet that we use is comprised of 24 different letters. But you can combine those 24 letters in ways that will allow you to make the millions of books that you find in the Library of Congress. Likewise, You can combine and recombine the 20 amino acids that make up the tissues of all living organisms in ways that allow you to make up the tissues of all living plants and animals. And what differentiates the differences between plant and animal tissues are the relative amounts of the differing amino acids. And yes, our bodies can tell the difference between animal and plant proteins, and they have differing effects on our health and physiology. So, what are some major determinants of protein utilization? Of course, adequate protein energy intake, adequate daily energy intake, because if we don't take in enough energy, our body strips the nitrogen off the protein and converts the carbon backbones into carbohydrate. Adequate intake of your essential amino acids over a 24 to 48-hour period. As I said before, protein complementing is not necessary, and exercise will improve the efficiency of protein utilization. Fact is, most Americans, including vegetarians and vegans, get 1.5 to 2 grams of per kilogram of protein per day. You actually only need about 0.7 grams per kilogram per day. So even vegetarians and vegans are getting 1.5 to 2 times as much protein as they need per day. So you have a built-in safety measure. And on average, people who follow plant-based diets get 70% more protein than they need every day. So even if you're working out, you still don't need to eat excess protein because you already have a built-in safety measure. Proteins cannot be stored. They cannot be burned for energy. So all protein not used as protein is converted into carbohydrate and stored as glycogen fat. Gluconeogenesis is the process of using protein to make new carbohydrate. Nitrogen and sulfur components of the amino acids are removed, and the carbon backbones are used to make new sugars or carbohydrate. The nitrogen is processed into urea because nitrogen cannot hang out in an aqueous or water-based solution because it'll turn it into ammonia, which will poison you. So it has to be converted into urea in the liver and then excreted. And the sulfur can't hang out because it turns into sulfurous acid, not sulfuric, sulfurous, but it still is an acid. And if it's not excreted by the kidneys, it'll leach calcium from your bones. Both urea and the organic acids have to be gotten out of the body before they cause damage. And our kidneys have a limited ability to concentrate urine. Therefore, these high protein diets can dehydrate our bodies. Carnivores have a much greater ability to concentrate their urine without losing water, unlike us. Carnivores are able to conserve water in high protein diets. Therefore, they're able to excrete the excess organic acids without losing their calcium and without damaging their skeletons. So how much protein is enough? And this is the craziness, the kind of questions that I get. A woman who had recently become vegan contacted me because she was distressed because her trainer told her that she had to consume 105 grams of protein per day. And she was wondering how in God's name was she supposed to get 105 grams of protein per day on a vegan diet. So I told her, I said, let's work backwards. The recommended amount of protein per day is really about 0.7 per gram, 0.7 grams per kilogram of body weight, but let's use 0.8 to just give you a little more wiggle room. So at 0.8 grams per kilogram, 105 grams times 0.8 comes out to a body weight of 131 kilograms. 131 kilograms of body weight, each kilogram weighing 2.2 pounds, means that you'd have to have a lean body weight of 289 pounds. That means that you would be as big as a female gorilla, okay? That is enough. That is way too much protein for an adult woman. So please do not listen to people who don't know what they're talking about. That is way more protein than any adult woman would need, and it is not healthy. There are other questions about, do elderly people need higher protein intake to prevent muscle wasting? And actually, the answer is no. The research that was done suggesting that it was necessary for elderly persons to consume more protein is flawed, because it was done using animal protein. It was done on elderly persons who were sedentary and not moving. There's evidence starting to come out now that when elderly people are fed plant-based diet, that they use the protein much more efficiently and don't need huge amounts. So, what is a natural diet for these animals? Clearly, people say plants. True. So, follow-up question. At what point in their lives do they eat animal protein? About 85% of you are going to say never. And then after some thinking, 15% of you are going to say when they're babies, when they're nursing infants during their rapid growth phase. And that is correct. And what that means is that for plant-based animals, animal protein is a potent growth stimulant. And that is important because it means that every time your body sees animal protein, it interprets it as a signal to grow. But your adult cells should not be trying to grow. Early nutrition researchers discovered animal proteins had higher percentages of essential amino acids when compared to compared to plant proteins, and they assumed the higher essential amino acid content meant animal proteins were more bioavailable and therefore of, quote, higher quality. You know, more is always better, right? Researchers also assumed the closer the amino acid composition of any protein was to human tissue, the better the quality of that protein. Well, that's idiotic, because taken to its logical conclusion, that is a de facto argument for cannibalism. And that's how they came to the conclusion that the egg was the highest quality of protein, the highest quality protein source, because it had, quote, of the foods commonly eaten, it had the closest composition to human tissues. Well, it's like, if the goal is to eat something with the closest composition to my own tissues, why should I waste my time eating eggs? I should eat the person sitting next to me. For herbivorous mammals, animal protein serves as a potent growth signal and growth stimulant. Animal protein turns on growth genes. These are called mTOR genes, and increases the level of growth hormones. As that animal protein passes through our liver, it causes the liver to start secreting a hormone called IGF-1. mTOR genes function as master regulatory genes for cell proliferation and growth, and they should only be active during the rapid growth phase of infant mammals. Animal intake, per se, increases mTOR activity, and the essential amino acid leucine has the greatest stimulatory effect on mTOR expression and activity. Decreasing animal protein intake decreases mTOR activity and will also suppress IGF-1 levels. mTOR genes are upregulated in human cancers, and cancers are also covered in IGF-1 receptors. So if you want cancer cells to grow, if you have cancer and want your cancer to grow grow wildly and outstrip the ability of your chemotherapy to kill it, or if you want some random cancer cell somewhere in your body to grow into a tumor, go ahead, eat animal protein, eat meat and dairy, because that's going to stimulate that cell to grow and turn into a tumor. Or if you already have a tumor, it's going to you're going to select for cells resistant to your chemotherapy to grow and grow and grow. And when your chemotherapy course stops, those resistant cells are going to be the ones that are going to come back and kill you. IGF level are 9 to 13% lower in men and women eating plant-based foods compared to meat eaters. And a landmark study showed that people eating higher animal protein intake, first of all, had a 75% higher overall mortality over an 18-year period and a 400% increase in cancer death, again, over an 18-year period. So let's look at leucine levels. Remember, leucine was the amino acid that was most prominent in turning on these growth genes that are associated with cancer in humans. And what you will see is that the leucine levels in commonly eaten foods are extremely high in eggs, dairy, meats, but plant foods, they're high enough to keep us healthy, but not so high that they turn on these mTOR genes. Now, looking over on the right side of this graph, you see that dairy products, which really are milk derivatives, are high in leucine, but that's because they should only really be ingested as milk by baby mammals during a time period when they're supposed to be growing. They shouldn't be ingested by adult mammals. And eggs, they should be high because they're trying to make baby birds. And so-called meats, these are actually the tissues of adult animals. So they shouldn't be ingested at all, really, except by maybe carnivore. So again, mTOR genes up-regulated human cancers. Leucine is the greatest activator of these genes. Animal protein increases mTOR and IGF-1 levels. Animal proteins also have much higher levels of an amino acid called methionine, which promotes cancer development and cellular and mitochondrial aging and oxidation. Plant proteins are proportionately higher in another sulfur-containing amino acid relative to methionine. Animal protein accelerates kidney damage, increases heart disease, diabetes, peripheral vascular disease, inflammation, and bone loss, and leading to osteoporosis. So when you compare animal protein to plant protein, which is better? Animal protein damages human kidneys and increases intraglomerular filtration pressure, accelerates glomerular sclerosis, and can precipitate chronic renal disease associated with increased risk for end-stage renal disease and dialysis in several observational studies. It damages mitochondria in the kidney, interfering with energy production, increases acid load and dysbiosis in the intestines, which can increase inflammation. Plant protein, by contrast, stabilizes, preserves, and improves renal function. Plant proteins can actually reverse some types of renal damage and renal disease. They've been shown to help stabilize and improve kidney function and delay or even prevent patients from progressing to end-stage renal disease and needing hemodialysis. So this says Gould's, I can't, I wanted to talk about the nonsense that is being advertised now about colostrum, because what the dairy industry is doing is trying to find a usage for all of the byproducts it's normally been throwing away. And one of the things that it is really pushing now is colostrum, which is just beyond ridiculous. So first of all, let's talk about what is colostrum. Colostrum is the first secretions from a mammalian breast. And it contains it's actually before the mammalian mother begins secreting milk proper, a thin fluid comes out of the breast for the baby, and it contains maternal antibodies, and these are species-specific antibodies and it also contains white blood cells, which produce immunoglobulin A that can help defend the newborn against certain infections. When the baby mammal consumes colostrum, they get passive immunity from the maternal antibodies and white blood cells. Bovine colostrum is rich in proteins that are targeted to calves and also has low fat and sugar content since it's not meant to be muscle fuel. Bovine, and so the point is bovine bovine colostrum is targeted to the organisms that the baby calf will encounter, like hoof and mouth disease, bovine leukemia, other cow-specific infections. It will do nothing for human beings. And it is absurd to be marketing this crap to humans as some kind of health tonic. But because people know nothing about nutrition and physiology, they're being sucked in by this nonsense and eating this ridiculous foolishness. It's beyond stupid, and it's almost criminal that these companies are being allowed to deceive the public this way. And then there's bovine collagen. Its consumption is being marketed as a means of making better human collagen. Again, this premise is utterly absurd. The amino acid composition of bovine and human collagen are different. Therefore, eating cow collagen does nothing to help or force human bodies to make more or better human collagen. The logic behind this marketing scam makes as much sense as claiming eating cow eyeballs will give humans better eyesight. Then there's bone broth. These products have been shown to be full of environmental pollutants, toxins, heavy metals, and other toxic compounds. There's no health benefit to consuming what is toxin-laden gruel. Animal Ags is simply looking for new ways to extract even more money from usually discarded parts of the carcasses of the animals they slaughter. It is not normal, natural, or necessary to consume any of these unhealthy products. So let's talk about iron. Iron is an essential but dangerous element and enzyme cofactor. Excess levels of iron in our body increase risk for cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. Therefore, our body does not want excess iron in our tissues. The human body can control the absorption of non-heme inorganic iron that is found in plant foods. However, our bodies cannot control the absorption of heme iron. Heme iron is the type of iron that has been incorporated into animal tissues. Meat eaters will always have higher iron levels than vegans because of the amount of heme iron they consume. The human body is programmed to efficiently recycle the iron it has already absorbed. So let's think about this for a minute. So heme iron is the type of iron your body has absorbed and incorporated into your own tissues, right? Every day, you slough off the entire lining of your digestive tract from your mouth all the way down through the end of your small intestine, digest those cells and reprocess the contents and reabsorb the parts that you want to keep. So the body is programmed that when it sees heme iron, it assumes that that is iron from your tissues and says, I need to hold on to this iron because I've already absorbed it, incorporated it into my own tissues, and I can, reprocess it and reuse it. It'd be silly to throw it all away and have to look for additional iron from the environment. So it's programmed to hold on to that iron automatically because it basically doesn't think you'd be dumb enough to go out and eat dead tissue from another animal. And therefore, the only heme iron your body should ever see would be heme iron from your own tissues. So yes, you will automatically absorb any heme iron your body sees. Unfortunately, we are frequently dumb enough to go out and eat dead bodies, and therefore we get massive amounts of heme iron from other animals, and that causes our bodies to automatically absorb excess levels of heme iron. So our endogenous iron recycling mechanism was not designed to block or prevent, and therefore cannot mitigate the absorption of exogenous heme iron. So again, heme iron is iron that has been incorporated into animal tissues. Is also sometimes referred to as organic iron. It's found in high amounts, red meat, muscle tissue, and some organ meats. It is an activated form of iron that catalyzes oxidative reaction. It's like a blasting cap that helps our bodies burn energy and again perform certain metabolic functions. Excess levels of this type of iron in the body are associated with increased risk for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and infections. Heme iron can promote cancer via lipid peroxidation, damage to our membranes, and formation of what are called reactive oxygen species and other free radicals that damage DNA and cell membranes. So what is a free radical? A free radical is a molecule or atom that has an unpaired electrons. Remember what I said about that the atmospheric nitrogen that was activated by those bacteria and plants when they were getting ready to make amino acids, that they attached electrons to them, and that those unpaired electrons were very reactive and ready to grab onto anything they could, like the creepy guy at the disco. Well, that's what a reactive oxygen species is. It's an oxygen atom with an unpaired electron that will then grab onto, attach to tissues in our body and damage them. So you don't want unpaired electrons floating around your body. Research shows a 12% increase in cancer risk for every 1 milligram of heme iron ingested per day. Okay, reread that. Research shows a 12% increase in cancer risk for every 1 milligram of heme iron ingested per day. Heme iron has been shown to increase pre-neoplastic lesions and alter gene expression in cancer cells in ways that make tumors more aggressive. So is that hamburger really that important and that delicious? Heme iron forms compounds that are toxic to normal cells, but not toxic to precancerous cells. It catalyzes formation of carcinogenic N-nitroso compounds, alters colonic flora, and induces cytotoxic damage, resulting in crypt hyperplasia, which are colon cancer precursor lesions. So bottom line, it damages your colonic cells in ways that lead to colon cancer development. This is a video in Dr. Michael Greger's nutritionfacts.org series all about heme iron. Please make a note of it, copy it down, and watch this video. All right. Let's talk about fiber. This is another video. I'll come back after the video plays.
In the US, we tend to get less than 20 grams of fiber a day, only about half the minimum recommended intake. But in populations where many of our deadliest diseases are practically unknown, rural China, rural Africa, they're eating huge amounts of whole plant foods, up to 100 grams of fiber a day or more, which is what it's estimated our Paleolithic ancestors were getting, based on dietary analyses of modern-day primitive hunter-gatherer tribes, and by analyzing coprolites, human fossilized feces. In other words, paleo poop. These most intimate of ancient human artifacts were often ignored or discarded during many previous archaeological excavations, but careful study of materials painstakingly recovered from human paleofeces says a lot about what ancient human dietary practices were like, given their incredibly high content of fiber, undigested plant remains, strongly suggesting that for over 99% of our existence as a distinct species, our gastrointestinal tract has been exposed to the selective pressures exerted by a fiber-filled diet of whole plant foods. So for millions of years before the first stone tools and evidence of butchering our ancestors, we're eating plants. But what kind of plants? One way you can tell if animals are natural folivores or frugivores, meaning leaf eaters or fruit eaters, is to map the area of absorptive mucosa in our gut versus their functional body size. Folivores are those meant to eat mostly foliage, leaves, while frugivores are better designed to eat fruit. The faunivores eat the fauna, another name for carnivore. If you chart animals out this way, they fall along distinct lines. So where do humans land? Here's our functional body size, and here's our absorptive area. So while eating our greens is important, it appears the natural dietary status of the human species is primarily that of a fruit eater. Why does it matter how much fiber we used to eat? Well, one theory for the rising levels of obesity in Western populations is that the body's mechanisms for controlling appetite evolved to match how many plants we used.
Oh my gosh. You guys have to forgive me. I'm sorry. I inadvertently hit the jeez. Hit the button. I'm gonna have to start it over, please. That was my fault.
In the US, we tend to get less than 20 grams of fiber a day, only about half the minimum recommended intake. But in populations where many of our deadliest diseases are practically unknown, rural China, rural Africa, they're eating huge amounts of whole plant foods, up to 100 grams of fiber a day or more, which is what it's estimated our Paleolithic ancestors were getting, based on dietary analyses of modern-day primitive hunter-gatherer tribes, and by analyzing coprolites, human fossilized feces. In other words, paleopoop. These most intimate of ancient human artifacts were often ignored or discarded during many previous archaeological excavations, but careful study of materials painstakingly recovered from human paleofeces says a lot about what ancient human dietary practices were like, given their incredibly high content of fiber, undigested plant remains, strongly suggesting that for over 99% of our existence as a distinct species, our gastrointestinal tract has been exposed to the selective pressures exerted by a fiber-filled diet of whole plant foods. So for millions of years before the first stone tools and evidence of butchering our ancestors, we're eating plants. But what kind of plants? One way you can tell if animals are natural folivores or frugivores, meaning leaf eaters or fruit eaters, is to map the area of absorptive mucosa in our gut versus their functional body size. Folivores are those meant to eat mostly foliage, leaves, while frugivores are better designed to eat fruit. The faunivores eat the fauna, another name for carnivore. If you chart animals out this way, they fall along distinct lines. So where do humans land? Here's our functional body size, and here's our absorptive area. So while eating our greens is important, it appears the natural dietary status of the human species is primarily that of a fruit eater. Why does it matter how much fiber we used to eat? Well, one theory for the rising levels of obesity in Western populations is that the body's mechanisms for controlling appetite evolved to match how many plants we used to eat. Our ancestors ate so many plant foods, we were getting like 100 grams of fiber a day, so for millions of years, food equaled fiber. So no surprise, one of the physiological mechanisms our body evolved to suppress our appetite involved this fiber. For example, fiber is metabolized by our gut flora into short-chain fatty acids, which bind to and activate receptors on the surfaces of our cells that alter our metabolism. For example, activating receptors on fat cells to increase the expression of the weight-reducing hormone leptin. Other hormones are affected as well, since until recently, food meant fiber. An increase in food intake meant an increase in fiber intake, which made our gut bacteria so happy they made lots of short-chain fatty acids, activating the cell surface receptors, releasing a bunch of hormones that make us lose our appetite and downregulate hunger, so we eat less. But if we eat less, there's less fiber in our gut, so less of these hormones are released, which boosts our appetite, we get hungry, and we want to eat. But what if food doesn't equal fiber, like on the standard American diet? Then we keep just getting those signals to eat, eat, eat. We're always hungry. If we haven't eaten our 100 grams of fiber for the day, our body may be like, what, are we starving here? Discovering this mechanism makes the food and pharmaceutical industries very excited. They figure they can now come up with the new drugs in the fight against the current obesity onslaught, or we could just eat as nature intended.
Trying to get this thing to, well, it's not going to do it, so okay. All right, so before I move on, I just want to say that graph clearly shows we have the absorptive area of a frugivore. However, other data show that we have adapted to a more foliage-based diet because we have 6 times more starch-digesting enzymes than any other primate, number one, and that's necessary for these giant brains that we carry around. And number two, we have these AH receptors in our small intestinal tract that work in concert with the ingestion of cruciferous vegetables to help prime and supercharge our immune system. So we do show adaptation to the ingestion of foliage plants in terms of how our immune system and digestive tracts works. So we have moved beyond just a fruit-based diet to include more grain and fiber-containing plant foods. But again, no adaptation to a plant, meat-containing diet whatsoever. So, boy, I really wish I could somehow get this thing to get out of my way. But this is just meant to show you that even what we consider brand fiber has a very complex structure. Plant fibers are structural elements of plants that are broken down, that cannot be broken down by vertebrate enzymes. However, the cellulose, lignins, and other major components, this, geez, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to,
Dr.
this
Mills,
this
do you have an issue with the controls on the Zoom thing?
this the panel on the side, the side. I want to minimize it so I can actually see what I have written. Um, uh, do you know what I mean? It's like it's taking up so much space. I can't even see what I'm.
Is it the Zoom controls? Is it, or
It on the side of my screen, there's this rectangle that shows the topmost
you
box is.
can you can grab that and try and move and try and move it to the left or right.
Yeah, I'm trying, and it's like not okay. Uh, there there we go. Uh, jeez. So now it's down to bottom. All right. Let me see if that'll work. Again, cellulose lignins, hemicelluloses are major components of plant cell walls. They are the structural components of plant cells. They are equivalent to the bones and connective tissue of animals taken together. They represent the most abundant organic compounds on Earth. Pectins are the water-soluble components and colloidal carbohydrate polysaccharides found in the cellular walls and fibrous portions of fruits and vegetables and other land plant tissues and are the glue that holds plant compounds together. Dietary fibers reduce our gut transit times and serve as substrates for the production of physiologic active metabolites by our gut biome and gut microflora. You know, there's some way to reduce this thing down to like a minimum size, and I'm trying to think, how the heck do I do that? I'm sorry, folks. It's just, it's like, geez.
Dr. Mills, if you want, can you bring up the meeting controls and then you can actually hide it from there. Can you press escape and bring up the meeting controls?
Okay. All right.
And
Press
then there should be something that says more, and then you could actually hide that floating box. I'm not sure what the selection is though.
hide video.
That's
You
it.
know what? You are God's gift to mankind. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, I'm going to run back through this really quickly so I can get back to where I was. Uh, and you would think after the 1 billion lectures I've done, I would know that. Um, all right. And so Dr. Burkett years ago showed that high fiber diets produce large soft stools that were non-malodorous in contrast to the small size and foul odor of the stools of meat eaters. And while I won't say that you can use the stools of people who are plant-based as cologne or perfume, they definitely don't require the hazmat suit that meat eaters require if you have to go in the bathroom after them. Fruits and vegetables, therefore, are not just vehicles for antioxidants. They contain innumerable micronutrients, many of which have antioxidant properties, and it is becoming clear they play many different roles in our metabolism. Micronutrients have effects on phase one and phase two biotransformation and transformation and detoxification pathways, on cell signaling pathways, and on endogenous antioxidant enzyme systems. In many studies, micronutrients have been identified as significant modulators of gene expressions. And the thing that I really need the listeners to uh, uh, get from this is that the human colon is extremely large for an animal our size. And it's not just a giant organ to store stool. It's actually a major organ of digestion. What is supposed to be happening when we eat a meal is number one, the meal is supposed to be filled with high fiber plant foods, and as it passes through the small intestine, the easily and rapidly absorbed nutrients are extracted by the small intestine. Then the fiber is introduced into the large intestine, where it is acted on by a diverse microbiome, which convert the fiber into short-chain fatty acids and other bioactive nutrients and compounds, manufacture vitamins that affect our entire physiology. It is becoming clear that the microbiome can manufacture compounds and nutrients and substances that affect every aspect of our physiology, from our mental functioning to our cardiovascular health, to our immune functioning, to our metabolism and risk for obesity and so forth. Researchers have shown that by transplanting the microbiome from skinny people into obese people, they have actually been able to make people lose weight. And so it is becoming clearer and clearer that the microbiome and the metabolism of plant fiber is essential to total human health. So humans are hindgut fermenters like horses, primates, and elephants. We have the classic anatomy of a hindgut fermenter. The long length sacculated structure of our colon is typical of hindgut fermenters. The ascending portion acts like the cecum. Cellulose contains large amounts of energy that can be partially extracted by bacterial fermentation, up to at least 10%, probably more, of daily needs. Fibers and resistant starch can then be utilized by beneficial species of gut bacteria to manufacture short-chain fatty acids, neurotransmitters, and other physiologically active compounds that are essential for optimal human health. The fact is that meals spend more time in the colon than anywhere else in our digestive tract. So on average, a meal should spend about 14 to 16 hours in the body. I know that for some people, it can spend more time than that. I would suggest that at that point, you have crossed the threshold into pathologic retention of contents in your colon. Because I've had people tell me, oh, I don't go to the bathroom for 2 or 3 days. That is not good. That is not normal. The average time for a healthy, high fiber meal to remain in your body is, let's even use the short end of that time period, 14 hours. Where is it during that time? Well, a meal should spend will spend no more than 3 hours in your stomach. If it spends more time than that, you're going to end up with acid reflux. So 3 hours. Then it passes into the small intestine. It will pass through the entire 30 feet of your small intestine in less than 2 hours. So you got 3 hours, 2 hours, 5 hours. 5 from 14 leaves 9 hours. And that entire time period, the majority of the time, it's in your large intestine. And what should be happening is that is the amount of time that the bacteria or your microbiome can be acting on that fiber to do all of these amazing things that our microbiome is able to do, but that's only if we provide it with the proper substrate. If you are if you own a business that can manufacture high-end furniture, but you give the artisans in your shop scrap metal, you're not going to end up with high-end furniture. You're going to end up with nothing. Likewise, if we don't provide our microbiome with the resource materials they need to do their job, we're not going to end up with the beneficial physiological compounds that they're able to make. We're going to end up with nothing, or toxic compounds. So there are 2 types, but many varieties of fiber. There's the water-soluble fibers, gums, pectins. As I said, these are the soft types of fiber that help hold plants together. They tend to be slimy when in solution, found in a variety of different plant foods. Then there's the water insoluble types, the celluloses and hemicelluloses. And the pictures that I showed you earlier were to make the point that even though they might look like they're just simple cell wall structures, that when you look at them microscopically, they have very complex structures that bacteria can get into and break down. And the fact is that Western diets actually kill off our good bacteria and select for bacteria that cannot break down plant fiber and can only rot leftover meat. So this brings up the concept of dysbiosis. As I mentioned, food spends more time in the colon than in any other gastrointestinal organ. Please, you need to start to understand the colon is a major organ of digestion, or at least it should be. When we eat the right foods, we get the beneficial microbiota symbiosis. When we eat the standard American diet full of animal fat, animal protein, we get microbiota dysbiosis. We select for unfavorable microorganism profiles that are not able to actually ferment plant foods. They can only rot animal foods. So dysbiosis is a term from pathological microbial imbalance and maladaptation in the colon. It's diets high in animal and dairy protein and animal fats cause unhealthy changes in the gut microbiome that can elevate risk for cancers, other metabolic diseases. And low fiber diets, carbohydrate depletion in the distal colon results in increased production of toxins like ammonia. So what NH3 is, toxic amines, phenols, and sulfides, and other putrefactive compounds. That's why the stool smells so bad. Hydrogen sulfide gas, which smells like rotten eggs, impairs cytochrome oxidase, DNA methylation, and tissue metabolism. Western diets can deliver up to 12 grams of animal protein residues per day to the colon, which produces 3.5 to 4 grams of ammonia per day. And that's equal to 60 to 70 kilograms of ammonia over a 50-year span. That's why so many people end up with colon cancer and other diseases of the colon. Ammonia concentration found in the lower bowel of meat eaters destroys cells, alters DNA and RNA synthesis, increases viral infections, and promotes growth of cancer cells. Dysbiotic bacteria can actually retoxify carcinogens that have been detoxified by the liver, reversing the detoxification actions of broccoli-stimulated detoxification enzymes. 1 month, however, on a plant-based diet will increase populations of healthy bacteria, reduce the pathogenic species. Studies show the changeover results in reduced intestinal inflammation, results in improved metabolic and immunologic parameters. By contrast, anaerobic degradation of animal protein residues is putrefaction and generates multiple toxic compounds. Animal food associated bacteria can directly injure the mucosal barrier, thereby causing leaky gut phenomena. Dysbiotic bacteria influence tumor progression via chronic inflammation, altering tumor microenvironment, and by generating toxic bile acid metabolites and other bacterial antigens and toxins that can increase cancer risk. Chronic inflammation increases cancer risk, tumorigenesis, and tumor growth through elevated cytokines, chemokines, and bacterial antigens and toxins. Dysbiosis has been shown to be associated with gastric cancer, colorectal cancer, prostate, and breast cancer. High fiber diets protect our GI tract because they stimulate more of the mucus-producing goblet cells that secrete a thicker layer of mucus that coats the entire intestinal tract, protecting the intestinal cells. The thicker layer of mucus provides an increased barrier function, which helps prevent translocation of bacteria from the lumen of the intestine into our bloodstream. This increased mucus layer also contains antibodies and other antimicrobial compounds and enzymes that repel and destroy a variety of potentially pathogenic organisms before they can establish a foothold and cause invasive disease. The fermentation or breakdown of fiber produces a variety of short-chain fatty acids that are not only utilized as an energy source, but also affect our physiology in a number of beneficial ways. Fiber can improve cognition, learning, and memory. So let's talk about the 4-carbon short-chain fatty acid, butyrate. Super cool. Why? Because it is the preferred fuel source for colonic cells. In other words, the cells in your colon do not like or try to draw their energy from your bloodstream. They prefer to draw it from the lumen of the intestine. They prefer to use butyrate as their energy source. And when there's lots of butyrate, these cells are very healthy. They maintain tight junctions, and that helps prevent bacteria from moving from the intestine into your bloodstream. However, if there's not enough butyrate, the cells become sickly, the junctions between your intestinal cells become loose, and then bacteria and toxic compounds can leak between those cells and into your bloodstream, and you have, voila, leaky gut syndrome. This is so important that butyrate enemas are sometimes used to actually treat people with ulcerative colitis to nourish and aid in healing of their colonic mucosa. Low butyrate may also be a factor in inflammatory bowel syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, and spastic colon. Butyrate also has an anti-cancer effect by promoting cellular differentiation, that is maturation of colonic cells and prevention of them forming precancerous cells. The critical differentiation effects of butyrate are now thought to be at least partially mediated by their effect on DNA histone proteins. Butyrate has been shown to induce a process, known as histone hyperacetylation that can modify how genes are regulated and has and also how and when they are transcribed. Butyrate may help inhibit amyloid plaque formation in the brain. Okay, let me repeat that. Butyrate may also help inhibit amyloid plaque formation in the brain and thus reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. The next in line, 3-carbon short-chain fatty acid, propionate. Propionate helps control blood sugar by acting on the liver to decrease glucose production. This is the exact same way the medication glucophage or metformin works. It also decreases cholesterol levels by inhibiting the enzyme HMA-CoA reductase. That is the target enzyme for statin drugs like Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor, Mevacor, all of them. They target this enzyme, but you can get the same effect by eating the right foods. It has also been shown to decrease triglyceride levels and to increase the level of so-called good cholesterol, HDL. Then acetate, which is 2-carbon short-chain fatty acid, helps decrease hunger because it is used by muscle cells instead of using your glucose, and spares body glucose stores. And the brain monitors your glucose stores because when they start to fall, it signals you to eat because the brain uses only glucose for its metabolism. And the longer your glucose stores remain adequate, the longer between the times that you get hungry. Both acetate and propionate activate receptors on cells that increase expression of the hormone leptin, which is also involved in the hunger regulation mechanism. Now, this is super important. A 2017 analysis in American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine concluded 95% of adults and children don't consume enough fiber. But get this. July 2023 study, maternal dietary fiber intake during pregnancy and child development. The lowest intakes of dietary fiber during pregnancy were associated with a 51% increased risk of delayed communication and a 45% increased risk of delayed fine motor skills, as well as delayed development in problem solving and social skills. In other words, if a pregnant woman does not eat enough fiber, it causes delayed brain function or brain development in her fetus's brain. Now, you remember that study looking at the habitual fiber intakes of various populations, and in the rural Chinese and African populations, they were much higher than they were in Western countries. And then people complain when these immigrants come over here and do better on standardized exams and get higher scores and admissions, do better on admissions criteria to our colleges. It may be because their mothers having eaten higher fiber intakes while they were carrying their children helped them have better brain developments and better brain functions. So again, the fiber intake of a mother during pregnancy affects the fetal or the development of her fetus while she's carrying the baby. The study showed maternal dietary fiber deficiency during pregnancy might influence an increased risk of neural developmental delay in her offspring. February 21 study, Going with the Grain, Fiber Cognition and the Microbiota Gut-Brain Axis. Despite the increasing knowledge of the impact of dietary fiber on mental health, only a few human studies have begun to shed light onto the underexplored connection between dietary fiber and cognition. Moreover, the microbiota gut-brain axis has emerged as a key conduit for the effects of nutrition on the brain, especially fibers that are acted on by specific bacteria to produce a variety of health-promoting metabolites. These metabolites include short-chain fatty acids, the vagus nerve, the immune system, gut hormones, and/or key neuroendocrine pathways have been proposed as underlying mechanisms of the microbiota brain crosstalk. Children on high-fiber diets demonstrate much better cognitive control, multitasking, maintaining focus and working memory. So plant fiber helps make us more human. And keep this in mind, the majority of polyphenol phytonutrients are bound to fiber, helping to explain the marked differences in health impacts between whole fruit and fruit juice. So in other words, when you juice, I'm not saying never drink juice, but the point is that the majority of the beneficial compounds in plant foods remain attached to the fiber and have to be released by the action of the bacteria in breaking down the fiber. So if you're only juicing, you're missing out on a lot. So the paradigm shifting research being done on the human microbiome showing how there's paradigm shifting research being done on the human microbiome showing how it influences and modulates every single organ system in our body and every aspect of our health. So much of the work heretofore done on human health has not accounted for the role of the microbiome and therefore must be revisited, revised, and rethought. It is becoming clear that the food we eat modifies and modulates human gene expression through direct epigenetic effects on our own DNA and also through the indirect effects or lack thereof mediated by the 39 trillion microbial cells of our microbiome. Ancestral humans ate 100 to 120 grams of fiber from a wide variety of plants every single day. These plants included grains, legumes, green vegetables, nuts, leafy plants, root plants, different kinds of fruits, and various fungi. Every species of plant has a unique fiber profile. Most modern Westerners only consume 15 to 30 grams of plant fiber per day. Based on human genetics and paleohistory, our microbiomes need and expect much more fiber on a daily basis than most people typically eat. Humans cannot have an optimally robust, healthy, and diverse microbiome if we are consuming only 30 grams of fiber a day. That is not enough fiber substrate for the bacteria in our guts to manufacture all of the varied physiologically active compounds, neurotransmitters, hormones, vitamins, and other phytochemicals our bodies need to keep our organs and organ systems functioning normally and at peak capacity, while also protecting us against inflammation and acute and chronic diseases. We will likely eventually find many health problems long thought to be phenotypically discrete diseases may in reality simply be the disparate manifestations of dysbiosis in different tissues and organ systems. Furthermore, if the scientists doing research on the human microbiome are studying the microbiomes of people eating predominantly animal and processed foods, by definition, they can never and will never arrive at the full truth of how our microbiomes can improve and optimize our health. And so the question is this how we should be getting our fiber?
Milton, just a heads up, we've got 2 minutes. You can go a minute over if you need to.
Gotcha. Well, the answer is clearly no. These artificial fiber supplements are the equivalent of minstrel shows done in blackface. In other words, if you see a minstrel show and think that you know how Black culture works, you're crazy. And these fiber supplements are the equivalent thereof. They're very scant relevance and resemblance to actual plant fiber. You got to get the whole plant to get the whole benefit. Lastly, D3, it's not a vitamin, it's a hormone, and we should be taking in a supplement every day because none of us are running around naked in the sun because we're not trying to get arrested. So we don't get the exposure, therefore, and people with darker skin need more. The RDA is set to prevent rickets, which as adults we're not even subject to. So please take a 5,000 IU supplement. It's essential for immune health, muscle function, cancer suppression, and for preventing depression and anxiety. It's also been shown to reduce fall risk and falls in the elderly. So I'm going to conclude by saying if you believe in God, then hey, you should believe him. Why? Because what did he tell us? He said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. Genesis 1:29. So in closing, we in the vegan plant-based community must stop trying to keep up with the meat-eating Joneses on matters of health. Because of what the Joneses eat, they have heart disease, diabetes, cancers, dementia, depression, allergies, autoimmune diseases, and early death. They are not our role models. Western medicine and Western societies have been seduced by the lie that drugs and medications can fix the results of ongoing bad behavior and a lifetime of dissolute living. Typically, or tragically, in many cases, our human-made chemicals only temporarily conceal, but don't correct the underlying problems and damages. We have abdicated responsibility for our health and that of our families and patients by allowing profit-driven marketing campaigns and/or misguided medical institutions and pharmaceutical companies to dictate how we define health and how we try to treat disease. We do not need to chase every shiny object or fear-mongering study thrown or pushed out by institutions and researchers that don't understand the power and importance of plant-based diets and lifestyles. The chronic diseases that afflict us did not fall from the sky at the behest of some malevolent God. They are the consequences of our own actions. As such, it is within our power to change our behavior and improve our health. We can start this process by redefining what is considered optimal human health. We were all born without preferences. No one asked for fried chicken, ice cream, or a pork chop in the delivery room. The unhealthy things we eat, we had to learn to like. We can learn to like healthy foods instead. We can change for the better. We must do this not only for our own health, but also for the health and well-being of our families and patients, and for the planet and its other inhabitants as well. And with that, I'm going to leave you with this medical advice. Eat your veggies. Thank you for your time and attention.
Well, perfect timing, Milton. I appreciate that. All right, awesome. I wish we had some time for Q&A, but unfortunately,
yeah, I know because of a late start. Yeah.
No worries. Life happens. Well, thank you for sharing all that information. I'm glad I got to speak to you some last night. So that was a great opportunity. If we can unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation for Milton.
Before you.
The best, yes. The best, yes.
There was information.
Considering.
It's almost like the